Good evening, everybody. Good evening. I'm Patrick Sutter, Supervisor of your Freeport Township. I would like to thank you all for attending this informational session on home rule this evening. Before we begin, please allow me the opportunity to explain two things, okay? What tonight's event is and what tonight's event is not, okay? Tonight's event has been created to educate and inform you as to what home rule is, how it came into existence, what home rule authority means, and what powers it gives to the local municipalities. What tonight's event has not been created to do is to act as a persuasion tactic or as an effort to guide your constitutionally protected decisions to vote for or against home rule, okay? So, what I'm saying in a nutshell is that we're not here to try to convince you to vote either way. It's up to you. We're here to give you an education on what home rule is, okay? It's just that simple, okay? With that being said, I would like to introduce our speaker for the evening, Freeport Township Attorney Michael Phillips.
Thank you, Patrick. Oh, no, don't. Just don't throw tomatoes. You can applaud. But thank you very much for coming here. Patrick just stole my thunder. I'm not going to tell you to vote for or against it. I'm not going to try to persuade you. All I'm going to try to do is discuss what does the words home rule mean in Illinois as opposed to some other communities. We're going to start with, I love history, I'm sorry, but we're going to start to explain to you what it is by telling you how it came about. The picture on the board is of a gentleman by the name of John Forrest Dillon, 1831 to 1914. You might recognize his last name as you will learn. He is the originator of what we now call Dillon's Rule. Dillon's Rule is the majority rule. When we come to talk to home rule, you're going to find out that home rule is an exception to Dillon's Rule. So what I want to explain to you how we developed Dillon's Rule and then why we created home rule as an exception to what Dillon's Rule requires. So Mr. Dillon, he received his medical degree from the University of Iowa in 1851. And 1 year later, he read what they used to call, I read the law, which means he studied the law under the guidance of a practicing attorney, and in 1 year he got his law practice, his ability to practice law in the state of Iowa. And he did practice it as a private attorney in Iowa and later on as a private attorney in New York City. He became a judge, a trial court judge in Iowa, and then he served on the Iowa Supreme Court, state Supreme Court. Then President Grant appointed him to the federal appellate court. And while he served on the federal appellate court, he wrote a series of a 9-volume book called Municipal Corporations. This was his argument for what the law was. He also served as a municipal or county attorney for Scott County in Iowa. He was in the private practice of law in Iowa and in New York City. And most interesting about Judge or Professor Dillon is that his great nephew who was named after him was an individual by the name of Charles Dillon Casey Stengel. The older people in the room will know who Casey Stengel was. And if we can understand what Casey said, you might be able to understand what his great uncle was trying to say. So, Dillon's Rules, now he wrote this book when he was a federal appellate court judge. It's actually 9 volumes discussing the rules of municipal corporations. As we know, cities, counties, they all are municipal corporations, so not a private business corporation. He stressed in his book that because state government created cities and counties, etc., the state could control what the city or county did. They were the parents, as state government, therefore the child, cities and counties, had to do what the state General Assembly said. State government has very wide-ranging power, much more than cities and counties. And he argued that the only thing a city or county could do was what the state said they could do expressly in the state statutes, or what might have been necessary to perform an express duty. And implied powers, I'll give you an example. There's a state statute that says you have to invest public funds in interest-bearing account. Nowhere in the statutes does it say you have to sign signature cards. You have the authority to, but in order to open an interest-bearing account at a bank, you had to sign a signature card. So that's an implied power. The express powers are what is expressly stated in state statute. There was another very smart man named Thomas Cooley who was from the state of Michigan. And he said, no, you're wrong, Dylan. City government has unlimited power. The state can't tell them what to do. Professor Cooley, if you've ever been to Detroit, there's a big law school in the city of Detroit called the Thomas Cooley School of Law. He was very well known. So we had these two competing theories. Does local governments have to obey what the state says, or do they have their own inherent authority? Well, I think it was 1906, the U.S. Supreme Court settled the case. In a case arising from the city of Pittsburgh. In that case, the Pennsylvania state legislature said to two cities that were right next to Pittsburgh, we're revoking your charters. You are here now and foreafter, you are part of the city of Pittsburgh. Those two communities did not like that at all. They sued. The case eventually got all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the argument was, does the state legislature have the authority to tell cities what to do, or to, in this case, to abolish them and make them part of another city? And on the Cooley's rule, they'd argue, no, we don't. Citing Cooley's rule, the Pennsylvania State General Assembly, their attorney argued, yes, we do. Dillon's rule. Well, the U.S. Supreme Court accepted Dillon's rule and rejected Cooley's rule. And that became Dillon's rule, in that a municipality can only do what the state lets it do. So anytime the general municipality wants to do something, they got to pick up the state statute book and says, see right here, it says we can do it. If it doesn't say so, and it's not impliedly necessary to perform an express duty, you can't do it. So, and I know you're not going to find this believable, but the federal government is a government of limited authority. I know it doesn't seem like it. But whenever the federal government wants to do something, they got to pick up the Constitution, and they got to point to where in the Constitution it says it can do it. Because the 10th Amendment says all powers not hereby granted to the federal government are reserved to the states. So now, it's come up through the years, we know that the federal government power is expanded, but it's still the concept. Where in the Constitution does it say you, federal government, can do this? So basically, in the 1906 case, 1906, 1907, the U.S. Supreme Court said from now on, Dillon's rule is valid throughout the United States. And that's how we got, that is the general rule. Cities can only do what the state who created them says they can do. Now, Illinois, we didn't have home rule at all until 1970. We had constitutions previously to that when we became a state in 1818, and then in 1870 we had another constitution. None of those had the concept of home rule in it. In 1970, when they wrote that constitution, under Article 7, which is entitled Local Government, it has a section, and I've handed you a copy of it from Mr. Phillips, was going to distribute. It created the theory of home rule. And basically, home rule is they may exercise and perform concurrently with the state any power or function to the extent that the General Assembly by law does not specifically limit. So unless the Illinois General Assembly has passed a statute which limits the home rule authority specifically, I'm sorry, I'm having a little trouble with this. Unless it passes a statute the home rule entity can legislate in that area. They don't have to point to a state statute that says they can. They got to look to see if there's a state statute that says they cannot. And what that means, and so the state law can limit home rule. We'll talk about that in more detail. Sometimes they vote by 3/5 of a vote to limit it. Sometimes they preempt it. And sometimes it's preempted because the state has regulated heavily. Anything, I guarantee you, anything that is regulated by the Illinois Commerce Commission, no home rule entity can contradict that. That's an area that's heavily regulated, and that's an implied limitation. Okay? We'll go into a little bit more detail on this. But, so home rule means they can, unless precluded, they can contradict state statute. They don't have to follow state statute, but they got to see if it's limited. What can't a home rule unit do? And this is right in the Constitution. You'll see it. It can't it can't say you violated our ordinance, therefore we're going to send you to jail for more than 6 months, which means they can punish you for up to 6 months. But then that causes other problems, such as have to provide attorneys at city expense or county expense if they're going to impose a penalty of jail time. They cannot license for revenue or impose taxes measured by the earnings. They can't do an income tax. There is no, unlike New York City, there's no city in Illinois that has a city income tax. Okay? They can't do something which by a 3/5 vote of the General Assembly has denied them the right to do it. They can't do it if the state passes a law saying this is exclusively a state function. You can't legislate in that area. They can't incur debt payable from property tax receipts that are going to mature more than 40 years in advance. They can't enter a bond issue for more than 40 years if it's paid by real estate property receipts. And they cannot define and provide for the punishment of a felony criminal offense. Those are all state-only areas. And when I use the term ad valorem tax, I'm sure you understand what that means. In Latin, it means according to its value. So it's a tax based on the value of an item, proportionally. It's not a flat rate tax. A flat rate tax is one type. An ad valorem depends on value. And examples of an ad valorem are your real estate taxes, your sales taxes, and your VAT, which is usually you see in Europe, it's called value added tax on the value added to a final product or service. Okay, so sometimes when sometimes you have to have a referendum before a home rule entity can act. Well, obviously to create or revoke home rule status. Other than when a municipality automatically becomes a home rule unit when they have 25,000 population. Doesn't mean anything else they have to do. If the citizens want to give it to a municipality of less than 25,000, they can do that by referendum, or they can take it away, as in the case of Rockford, which in 1983, despite being the second largest city in the state of Illinois, lost its home rule status because there was a citizen-led referendum, aided and abetted by the Rockford Register-Star in that case. A home rule needs a referendum to change its officers, their manner or selection, and terms of office. Furthermore, a home rule entity without referendum approval cannot adopt, alter, or repeal a form of government provided by law, and it can't approve debt to be incurred payable from ad valorem taxes in excess of 0.5%. That's real complicated. You don't need to worry about that. That's what rarely occurs. But that's what's in the Constitution. Okay, what can a home rule unit do? A home rule unit may exercise any power and perform any function, this is key, pertaining to its government and affairs, including, but not limited to, the power to regulate for the protection of the public health, safety, morals, and welfare. We call that the police power, okay? When a government regulates something or creates an ordinance or a resolution, where they're doing it in order to protect the public health, safety, morals, and welfare. Any restaurant ads, any criminal acts, those are all under the police power. Police power does not mean it's being done by the police department. It's the theory of we're protecting the public. Okay? What can it do? It can license. It can create new licenses that people have to obtain. It can impose taxes above the limit that may be in the statute. And the statute sets a limit. Home rule can go above that. And as we'll find out, property tax caps, which put up an overall limit on the amount of taxes collected, home rule entities are exempt from real estate property tax caps. And of course, it can incur debt. Okay? One of the important things to know, though, is that, as we said, home rule is an exception to Dillon's rule. Dillon's rule says you can't do it unless it's in the statutes. Dillon's rule says, home rule says you can do it, unless they say you can't. So it's the exception to Dillon's rule. And home rule, the term, means what the state says it means. It's not the same from state to state. For instance, I was a municipal attorney in Indiana, and when I was very surprised to learn that every municipality in Indiana has a home rule, but home rule doesn't give them the ability to contradict state statute. Illinois, we can contradict state statute in many instances. So if you hear somebody say, well, home rule means, what state are you talking about? Well, Nevada. Well, that has nothing to do automatically with Illinois. You got to see what the law means. What does Nevada mean? And I'm just taking them. Iowa's a home rule state. What does that mean in Iowa? Home rule is the minority. Okay? Not every state has it. Because every state's got Dillon's rule, because the U.S. Supreme Court said Dillon's rule applies. But not every state has home rule. Again, in Illinois, we first got home rule in 1970 Constitution. It did not exist prior to that time. And one of the reasons they created it is the theory is, if you have a unique problem and you want to solve it and you can't find anything in the state statute, that means you got to send your representatives down to Springfield. You got to convince both houses, both parties, to pass a new law that allows you to do it. That could take you 9 months, a year, or maybe longer. That's what it means. If it's not in the statute, they've got to pass a new law allowing you to do it. So I'm the attorney for Cedarville. If we had a unique problem that isn't in the statute, we'd have to go down to Springfield and try to convince them to pass a new law that allows us and other similar municipalities to do the action we wanted to do it. Unless they do it, we can't do it. Okay. What does home rule authority really mean? As I've said this before, under Dillon's rule, a non-home rule municipality has got to, here's a state statute that says we can do it. If they can't, go to Springfield and convince them to change it. Home rule is an exception to Dillon's rule, allows a home rule municipality to take an action that can be passing an ordinance, that can be imposing a new tax or a new fee that has not expressly been allowed by state statute. And in Illinois, a home rule municipality can even pass an ordinance which is different than home rule. That is different than state statute, unless it's an area that the state has prohibited the home rule entities from regulating in it. What you'll see, oftentimes you'll see in a statute, like in the Open Meetings Act, this act is a limitation on home rule authority, and that's what it means. Home rules, you can't change it. You've got to follow this law. Even your home rule authority has been limited. They put those words right at the end of the act to make it clear that a home rule entity cannot have a different. They can be more strict, but they can't be less strict. Okay. Here's some examples. if there's a new problem, an issue that's facing an Illinois municipality, and I should say there's only one county in Illinois that's home rule. Anyone want to guess what county it is? Cook. By the Constitution, okay? No other county has been given that. I'm not even sure any other county is even eligible to, even by referendum, to create it. But as far as I know, no one has ever asked in the last 52 years to have a county become home rule. So how do you respond? If there's a problem, we've talked about this, go to the statute, does it let us do it? If not, get them to change the law if you can. Home rule just tell, hey, we'll respond. This is what we think is appropriate. This will solve the problem. They pass the ordinance and they go forward. That's the advantage. Okay, how do you become a home rule? The Constitution, Article 7, says there's two different ways to become home rule. One, you're a city or a municipality, which means city and villages. If your federal census is 25,000 or more, you're home rule automatically, no further action needed. Or you can have, the citizens can put a referendum on the ballot, or the governing board, city council, village board, can vote to put a referendum on the ballot as to whether the municipality should become a home rule entity, and then the citizens vote yes or no. Okay. 25,000 by ordinance, by Constitution. In Lake County, there's a little tiny town called Matawa. It has 533 people. They passed a referendum to become home rule. There are more horses in Matawa than there are people. That's the joke about Matawa from Lake County, because I used to work there. They said, yeah, there's more horses there. They got to. So, but the citizens put a referendum up. They wanted to become home rule, and so they have been. After the they can revoke home rule status by putting, no matter what your population. 1983, that was Rockford. If the population of the city, according to the official federal census, is less than 25,000, this is our case, then you have to have a referendum within 2 years as to whether the home rule should remain. They said, however, there's an exception to that rule. If you became a home rule entity because of a referendum passed by your citizens, then your population later drops down. You don't need a referendum in that case. You didn't become home rule because of population. You're not going to lose it because of population, but you do have to. You don't have to have a referendum in that case. Obviously, most people with populations of over 25,000 became home rule because of the fact of their population. The Illinois Municipal League a few months ago put out a program that said they went through all the referendums that were held on the issue of home rule status, and they basically said it all depends on how you. It usually depends on how you word the referendum status, whether it's a positive statement or a negative statement. I don't remember the exact statistics, but it was like 4 out of 6 when it was positive kept home rule, 2 out of 5 when it was negative kept home rule. The Illinois Municipal League has issued a new frequently asked questions entitled Census and Home Rule, and they said the state statute says that the wording of the referendum, because of population, is shall the city of whatever cease to be a home rule unit, and citing the statute. That's according to the Illinois Municipal League. Okay. Let's talk about how changes have occurred in home rule. I started working on the Illinois Home Rule Attorneys Committee in 1990. At that time, there were 106 home rule units, home rule municipalities in Illinois. There are now 219. The vast majority of the reason for the increase is not just because of population, it's because of referendums that have passed. As far as I know, there's only been 2 communities that were home rule and have lost it because of a referendum. City of Rockford, 1983, and Westmont, the village of Westmont, which was 10 years ago in 2012. After the 2010 census, 5 municipalities went under 25,000. So all 5 of them had to have a referendum on whether to keep it. There was a total of 9 home rule referendums in 2012, the last time we had this question. 4 municipalities retained home rule, even after the population dropped under 25,000. The only one, Edwardsville, Homer Glen, Maywood, and Mount Vernon. One of those lost population communities, Westmont, lost home rule. It was not approved. And 4 other municipalities rejected the adoption of home rule: River Forest, Kenilworth, Elkville, and Harrisburg. According to the Municipal League, since 1980, only 2 municipalities have lost home rule status because of a referendum. I'm not sure that's correct. I mean, they said that in their memo, but I remember seeing other stats. It may have been as many as 4, but the only 2 that we know of is 83 for Rockford and 2012 for Westmont. In 2012, according to the IML, there are 5 municipalities in November who are conducting home rule referendums based on loss of population. Collinsville, Carbondale, Freeport, Kankakee, and Galesburg. So, question is going up around the state. And it happens, like, because of the population comes out usually in years ending in 1 with the new census, then the next year, 2002, the next year ending in 2, that's when the referendums occur. Okay. Now let's talk about some of the major issues in home rule status. One of the issues is the authority to create new ordinances imposing new fees, new regulations that restrict what a person and or business can do. They have the authority to impose taxes that are not listed in the state statutes. Transfer tax, real estate tax, sales tax. The total amount of the real estate taxes collected by a home rule entity is not bound by the state property tax caps, commonly referred to as PTEL, Property Tax Extension Limitation Law. And they have the authority to create new funding source for capital improvement projects without first requiring referendum approval from the citizens. Okay. Different ends of the home rule spectrum, we're talking about it. Mattawa, 533 population. Voters approved home rule status through a citizen-initiated referendum, and as we know, Mattawa has more horses, and they have a large Granger facility there. Rockford, which had a population of around 160,000, they revoked home rule after a campaign led by the Rockford Register-Star because the city had increased taxes in the previous years. Years later, the Rockford Register-Star said, they admitted might have been short-sighted because the financial crush that occurred in Rockford. So Rockford to this day is not home rule. It's the 4th largest city in the state, and it's not home rule. Effects of loss of the home rule status. If you lose home rule status, what happens? The ordinances that were regulated citizens and businesses that were passed solely under the home rule authority are probably no longer valid or enforceable. Taxes solely imposed under the municipality's home rule authority are ended, except, there's an exception for this, and this came from Rockford. When Rockford lost home rule, it had all these special home rule taxes that were pledged to pay bonds. That case went up to the appellate court, at that time the 2nd District in Elgin, and the appellate court since said those home rule taxes will continue until the bonds are paid off. So there was a local attorney here in town who was an assistant Rockford city attorney, and he was the one who took that case up. And if they lose home rule status, then the governing board, whether it's the city council, village board, must consider how much of revenue they may or may not lose and where they're going to have to reduce spending if they decide to reduce spending. There's no automatic reduction of any line item. You don't automatically take the money out of one line item. That decision of how to spend the money is a policy decision based by the village board or the city council. Let's talk about what happened when Rockford lost home rule. Initially, they suffered a significant loss of revenue. They also lost population and industries. Then years later, they created, anybody remember the broken window enforcement program under Mayor Larry Morrissey? Larry had I should say Notre Dame class in 1990. He started a program where he adopted, there's a theory that if you start responding to broken windows, you can get a heads up on preventing the deterioration of your neighborhoods. So they started vigorous enforcement. They could still do that under non-home rule. They didn't have to be home rule entities, so they took that. They've also had some significant capital improvements in Rockford in the last several years. They improved the Metro Center, also known as the BMO Bank Center. They had a $500 million hospital built, Mercy Health, right on the tollway. They had a $250 million addition, I believe it's to Woodward Governor. The Rockford International Airport has had multi-million-dollar improvements. So this town has not totally gone down once it lost home rule. And I mentioned that the last point is that we talked about, they didn't automatically lose all the taxes right away, because if they were pledged to pay off bonds, they were allowed to keep them until the bonds were paid off. Okay. Now, the city of Carbondale is going through this right now, and they have it on their website, and they have an interesting website talking about this. As you can see, Carbondale went from 25,902 in 2010 to 21,857. So they're going to have a referendum November 8th, 2022. This is what it said on its website. The city of Carbondale said on its website that it spreads, the advantage of home rule is it spreads the tax burden from residents to non-residents through sales, gasoline, and other local taxes. Over half the sales tax generated in Carbondale are from non-residents. It helps Carbondale maintain a lower property tax levy. The City Council has maintained a flat real estate tax levy for 20 years by using sales tax to fund city services. It improves the city's bond rating, saving taxpayers interest costs, and it can opt out of some unfunded mandates as they are created, unless preempted by the state of Illinois. Okay. Some of the other advantages, I'm sorry it's kind of low on there. It allows the city to better protect residents through ordinance pertaining to zoning, property and building code enforcement, sanitation, civil disturbance, and all the matters of public health, safety, morals, and welfare. There you go again, the police power as it's said. You don't lose zoning rights or police or your ordinance automatically because you become non-home rule, but it gives you more flexibility if it is, according to the city of Carbondale. It allows the city to require build business and landlord licenses. It gives the city authority to require home inspections through the landlord rental registration program. Non-home rule communities can only inspect properties in response to a tenant complaint. Home rule allows the city inspectors to proactively enter and inspect all rental property every 3 years to ensure that they conform to the city's standards. Since it's a college town, that's probably very important to them. Allows the city to enact animal control ordinances to protection to animals and residents. The city's animal control officer responds to nearly 500 calls annually. Okay? This is what the city of Carbondale says are the disadvantages of home rule. Home rule grants municipalities broad taxing and regulation authority, and cities can only enforce laws where the power has been granted by the state, Dillon's rule, in other words. So They had a long website. I thought that was kind of informative, showing what other communities are looking at. Okay, here's the City of Freeport referendum that's coming on your ballot on November 8th. Shall the City of Freeport remain a home rule unit of government? Yes or no? If a voter wants the city to remain a home rule entity, then that voter should vote yes. If the voter does not want the City of Freeport to remain a home rule entity, then the voter shall vote no. That's your brief overview. I don't want to bore you all. We could spend 8 hours talking about the intricacies, and we're not going to do that. So that gives you a good introduction to what home rule can and cannot do. Any questions? None? Okay. I didn't think I was going to win with that. Let's start over here. This gentleman.
Has the city determined what it would lose in terms of taxes? Has there been any announcement?
I have no idea. See, I have no knowledge of the City of Freeport. I don't do any work for them, and I live in Belvedere, so Belvedere, which is gaining in population. When I moved here, Belvedere had 12,000. It's now up to like 26,000. In the back, yes, ma'am.
When they talked about the police power, it talked about regulating public blah, 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 morals.
Health, safety, morals, and welfare.
Can you give me an example of public morals?
No spitting on the sidewalk. You know, no standing, no. A lot of ordinances which can be prosecuted are the same as state statute. But the difference is, if you prosecute a city ordinance, normally you're not going to jail. There's no possibility of jail. City ordinances usually, you saw they home rule can have up to 6 months. I think maybe all. And but most city ordinances are fine only. I'm not aware of any city that has jail time as a penalty for any violation of their ordinance. But they can regulate a lot of different things. No throwing waste onto the sidewalk. No dumping waste into the street. You know, those are all examples of regulation for the. And if morals can be a lot of different things. No harassing children or something like that. Although, yes, ma'am.
So if I understand this correctly, under home rule, they could have, the city could have the power to raise our real estate taxes.
Yes, they're not bound by these limits.
They could raise our real estate taxes.
Yes, they can.
Okay.
Any home rule entity can do that. Yes, ma'am.
What is the anticipated change in our property taxes?
No idea. I mean, that's city specific, and I have no knowledge of that. Sorry, I can't tell you. And then you won't know until they actually do it.
Yes.
How are they gonna do the budget? You know, they have to pass an appropriation ordinance by August 1st. July 31st is the last day. You know, May 1 starts the fiscal year, but they have until the end of the first quarter to pass the appropriation ordinance. Freeport has in the past, I don't know what they're doing now, but in the past they've gone into July. Yes, sir.
Hey, Mike, why do you think the real estate people are against home rule? They're running a lot of ads against it. And it doesn't appear to me that there's a real good reason for that.
I think the possibility of increased property taxes, which will make it,
How will that affect them?
it's harder to sell property if the taxes go up. I'm not a real estate person. I don't do real estate
No,
work.
that's not true. You are.
Well, if you talk about a closing, one thing. Or just because I did a $63 million ethanol plant, you know.
Didn't you say, or wasn't that up there, where if they need to, they can go to the real estate tax and increase it
Yes.
even beyond what the state allows?
Yeah, they can have a transfer tax well beyond what the state says.
So if they lost home rule, they can raise?
No. A home rule entity can go beyond what the state. A non-home rule entity is strictly limited to whatever the state says.
Then they can't raise the rate on taxes.
Beyond, they can't raise it beyond the property tax
And
limits.
that would be why the realtors put out the flyer saying, hey, we don't want the taxes on real estate.
You should ask them exactly why they feel that way, but I think that's something you're gonna get. And transfer tax is another issue.
I mean, they have raised quite a bit, and then the transfer tax on top of it.
I have no idea. I don't follow it. Yes, ma'am.
Do you know how, where we are in reference to the state tax limit?
No idea.
Okay, but if I'm understanding you correctly, not only can they not raise the taxes, they have to roll them back to where the state level is? So our
If they
taxes
lose
would
home
be-
rule status, if they lose home rule status, then they
Yeah,
have to
then
obey
they
the
have to
state
roll
limits.
back to where the state,
Right, except if there is a tax collected pledge to pay off bond issues, at least for that. That,
but we don't know where that is right now in reference to the state.
no, this wasn't specifically dedicated to Freeport. I'm just, and this is just a
And
general.
nobody has told us that in any kind of forum at all that I know of.
I don't know if they know. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Well, wouldn't the city know that? I mean, the city obviously has these answers. And, you know, I've been researching this, and I don't know how anyone can make an informed, intelligent decision about this without having any idea what the financial aspects of this are. I mean, you know, I went to another one of these, and this is titillating and fascinating law, but, you know, what do we stand to lose? What's our annual budget now? What percentage of it is this, and why aren't we getting that information? And that's really, I'm asking to everybody rhetorically, where the hell is the city on this? You know, I mean, really, we're gonna vote for something. They're asking us to vote for something without having any idea how it impacts the budget, our taxes, or our debt.
Actually, there is a number,
Well,
I believe
the
it's $3 million.
statute-
What number?
The number that, the shortfall by losing home rule.
What
And
percentage of our annual budget is that? Do you know?
why does it matter? It's $3 million. That's a lot of money in my book.
Well, it depends how many people and households it's divided by.
Well,
And there's a hell of a big
23,870.
difference between if it's 1% or 10%, that's why. But the point is, where's the information? You think it's 3 million,
Well, that's what I've read.
okay.
That was put out by the city.
Do you see my point though?
Yes.
Don't you think
No,
we'd
I
like,
actually don't.
you don't see my
No,
point?
I actually don't. Let me tell you why. First of all, historically, we've had home rule in Freeport. Our taxes are pretty low comparatively. I used to live in Shorewood. I have probably a nicer house but less money here, but my taxes are half of what they were in Shorewood.
And they had home.
And we had home rule. So,
It's a whole different community.
but historically,
In a
it's in
whole
Will
different
County.
county.
So,
I know it
but
is.
historically, that our taxes haven't gone up.
Do you mind if I jump in really quick?
Please do.
So I want to be transparent. I'm the communication director for the city of Freeport. My name is Kevin Sutter. I'm not here campaigning. I'm not here explaining my own views. This is just a little bit of background. The city is very limited in what we can. It's difficult to put out a ton of information, and we can put out information, but we don't want to be seen as promoting or opposing home rule because it's a referendum ballot. But I can give you a few numbers. Our annual budget, the general fund, is typically around $18 to $20 million. Our property tax levy gathers about $2.5 million. That's what our property tax brings in. You see how much that is of the budget. Now our sales tax, which is granted by home rule that we collect not just from Freeport residents, but also from people that come to shop within like Walmart or other places around town, that brings in $4 million. So by losing home rule, that sales tax, unless it's pledged to a bond or some other avenue like that, would no longer be able to be collected by the city of Freeport. So that's an estimated $4 million that is to be cut from the general fund. So the city would have to look at reducing the general fund budget by 20%. Does that answer?
So
A little bit.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I do know who
Yeah.
you were. I'm not clear on this. In other words, you're saying that the taxes we charge on sales, we cannot charge people from out of city, without, only within the city?
We would not have any sales tax
No sales
specific to
tax.
the city of Freeport. No, it would just be state sales tax. We wouldn't be able to impose a city of Freeport tax that helps pay for the general fund.
Do you know how much bond debt we have?
I don't know that number off the top of my head.
Okay, so actually, the amount of money we collect off of real estate is really fairly low
Yeah,
in comparison to what we collect off of sales tax.
yeah, so like I said, it's $2.5 million that's collected from property taxes, and then it's $4 million from sales tax.
And do we have tax on things like, at restaurants and hotels
Yes.
and all that?
So
Because
we
I know
have a
we
whole-
have a lot of
It's an occupancy tax.
those kind of taxes coming into the city too.
Yeah, so granted by home rule, we also have a food and beverage tax.
Mhm,
We have a hotel tax, real estate transfer tax,
mhm.
Communication.
and a gas tax as well. So all of those taxes, to my understanding, would not be able to be collected.
Mhm.
And then that's additional funding that could not be used.
Isn't there a tax on telephone and gasoline that comes to Freeport?
I don't think there's a telephone tax, but there is a gas tax.
Telecommunications tax. There were sunset clauses for those at one time.
And they didn't sunset it.
No, they just kept them going.
Is it $4 million we're gonna lose? Did you say tax we just talked about, is that included in that $4 million we're gonna lose?
With
The
that,
transfer tax.
I think with those other miscellaneous taxes, that pushes it closer to $5 million.
Oh, well.
So the total revenue of Freeport is $20 million a year.
That's the general fund.
Okay. What else is in addition to the general fund? Does that include the home rule income?
I'm not sure.
Because I don't think all the home rule income is in the general fund, is it?
Has to be.
It doesn't have to be, it can be allocated to whatever the taxes are.
That might be a question above my pay grade.
I think
I'm not
I think
sure.
it is.
So the home rule taxes, if it were a total of 20 and it were a total of 4 that we lose, that's 20%.
Right. So, just as a bit of background, all of the departments, as we're going through these finance committee of the whole meetings the next month or so, looking at budgets, what are we gonna budget for next year, all of the departments are required to make an additional budget that is 20% reduced. That includes discussions of reducing staffing, reducing capital improvement.
Fire, police.
Yeah, those are tough conversations.
Are they gonna lower any of their salaries?
Yeah, does that include your department?
So, but we're still not certain what the numbers are. I'd like to see the numbers. And I'm glad you think that's funny. I don't think it's funny.
I don't think, what do you mean to think it's funny? She just gave you the numbers.
No, she said she didn't know, and some of it might be beyond her pay grade, and I wouldn't expect her to know. She's not a finance person from Freeport.
You don't know that. She might have a
No,
degree in finance.
She's not a finance person with Freeport, I do know that. unless she's
Those would be
in
really
jobs.
great questions to bring up at a city council meeting as to what are where did these funds go, and can you explain?
Well, my beef is why isn't it on the website? Why isn't it publicized?
I don't think they can legally, can they?
No, they can, they just can't politic for it one way or the other. There's nothing preventing the
Okay, we
city.
got questions back here.
We have a question in the back.
Can you guys take your argument to the hall, please?
In the last row, the young lady in the last row.
when we're dealing with a matter of money, we gotta see the numbers.
That's my whole point.
Okay, all right.
Okay, folks.
I am not even gonna try to speak for the city, it's not my job nor my place. I did serve on the city council for 9 years, so I have a little bit of experience here. Thank you so much, Ms. Sugg, for speaking up. I believe the city could be a lot better at getting information out to speak to this issue. It would be really nice if the city told us all these numbers. They are working on it. I also want to say that the city is required to put the referendum on the ballot. The city may not
Yes.
advocate. The city may not pressure. All they can do is put information out. The other thing I want to remind everybody is your tax bill, it's only like 10% of your total tax bill goes to the city. That's it. 10%. When she talks about $2.5 million in property taxes, that's not much. It's not much to run a city on. And if you lose 4 or 5 million, that's a huge chunk for a budget of the size of this city. But I want you to remember again that only 10% of what you see on your annual tax bill goes to the city. That's a much smaller chunk than what I'm paying. And the majority of the money that we pay in taxes actually goes to the school district.
The vast majority.
Which is also very important. I have lots of opinions. I'm not going to share them. But please, I think it behooves all of us to be watching whatever source of news there might be in this town, to learn more about it. There will be more opportunities to learn more. I encourage you to find all those opportunities and encourage your friends to find. I've been talking to people about home rule. They're clueless. They have no idea it's even on the ballot.
Okay. Let me do before I come back to you, the gentleman in the back.
I'm gonna get my 2 questions in now. So you said that the sales taxes is about 20% of the city revenue. So where's the other 80% coming from?
I'm not a finance director, I'm not sure.
Gary, you have an answer?
Look, if you're really interested in this, truly interested, the city publishes their audit on their website. If you take the time, every question you would ask is in that audit. But the one thing to remember is if you lose home rule, the only tool in the city's toolbox is property tax. So that is the only tool they will have in order to raise revenue. Just keep that in mind.
But where's 80% coming from?
It comes from a share with the state. It comes from grants.
So clearly there's other revenue sources other than property tax.
She said
right?
4. I've done my own analysis. I think it blows a $6 million hole in their budget. It blows up one fire station. It blows up half your cops. This is a huge issue. And the people who are fighting hardest to kill home rule are realtors. And I do not understand what they are afraid of because they're being directed out of Springfield. The realtors are dumping $100 grand in here to oppose this. And you have to ask, why?
Okay, let me get my second question in.
Question number 2.
No one has the answer.
Hold on a second.
Where the 80% revenue is coming from. You mentioned that in the Carbondale presentation, they said if they lose home rule, they can't have programs to force inspections and the landlord fees.
They do it a different way. They can still have inspections on a regular basis, but they have special rental inspection program funded by home rule funds for that purpose.
So if you lose home rule, can you still have those programs, or you just
Gotta have the money to run it.
Huh?
You gotta have the money to run it, is what they said in Carbondale.
Okay, so you can if you can find a financial
Well,
resource.
I'm sorry, if I can get back. Okay, I have it.
Mike, got one here.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry.
So if the city cannot advocate one way or another, are the city's police and fire department considered city employees? Yes. And why are they going around?
They're not city government. if they're going around, they can go around as their own person, as their own people, and take it. And maybe their union has a position, but they're not spending public funds. You can't spend public funds to advocate one way or the other. You can spend money to inform people what the issues are, but you can't advocate. The school district got in a little trouble with that a few years ago when they posted up on their school building, vote yes on the referendum. And at which point they got a phone call from the state's attorney's office reminding them that was not appropriate. I know that
Well, I
person.
got something in the mail today. I got 2 things in the mail that says vote yes for home rule.
But it's not from city government. It's not from city government using city funds.
Oh, I didn't know.
It's from private, it could be from the realtors. You know, the realtors, the same way they're saying vote no, other people may say vote yes. There's one guy, he's been waiting. Let's go him first.
Mike, if I could.
Oh, hi, Tom, I'm sorry, I didn't see you.
That's okay, no problem. I'm like Pat. I spent some time in the city council. I spent 16 years on it as first ward officer. I'm a little bit familiar with this, but I want to tell you, some of the stuff you're going to lose and some of the stuff things go for. We talk about the 2-cent gas tax. 2-cent gas tax replaces equipment in the city of Freeport, whether it be mostly in the street department, but also has been used to purchase police vehicles with and to purchase other vehicles for the fire department, so on and so forth. A lot of that revenue, like you discussed, it comes from people driving through town and out of town. Your hotel motel tax that you talked about, that goes to promote the city of Freeport. Greater Freeport Partnership, Chamber of Commerce, many of those things, economic development, all of those will lose funding if we lose home rule. We had a person come to speak from a accounting firm about home rule and explain it to different people throughout the community that own businesses and stuff. First question I asked him was, has Freeport ever abused home rule? The answer to that is no. It can be used to have better availability of bonding power. We've already bonded jobs, we've already got loans for jobs and stuff that have been 25% forgiven from the government. You basically right now, I believe, have about 10 firefighters that have in their possession a layoff notice on December 1st. If this doesn't go through, okay, after November 8th, it ceases right then, period, end of conversation. So, when I was on the council, we had 51 police officers. We now have 40. You know how many people that leaves to police the streets at night? So, if we lose, whether the figures are $4 million or the figures are $6 million, it's got to come from someplace. What in economic development? You know, all of us know how we've suffered in the way the city looks from cleanup and this and that. What if a community development loses one of their inspectors? You know, guess what? All that goes down. Every department is going to lose. Home rule makes everything work in the city of Freeport because you can keep it local. If you want to raise real estate taxes, or if you want to get money for a referendum, you know how long it's going to take you to put that on the ballot? Mike mentioned 9 months. That's pretty conservative. It's probably going to be more in a year and a half, 2 years. So everything that you could get money for fairly easy will be pushed out for a number of years. So it'll change Freeport immensely, and it'll change Freeport's future immensely when you have no money for economic development, no money to pay not necessarily the wages, but the benefits on firefighters, police department, city street workers. So it will take a big hit in the city.
The young lady over there, ma'am, did you get your question answered? The young lady in red with the face mask on, ma'am, you had your hand up. Did you have a question?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, you had your hand up. Did you have a question?
Not recently. I mean. It was
Okay, I'm sorry. I skipped over you to ask somebody else. I wasn't sure. Steve.
Okay,
Come back.
money into community development, Tom, that's called incompetence. 5 directors in 5 years, under home rule. Okay, that's a different issue, but also it's underfunded as it is. However, let's completely understand that the mess with the water rates, had Freeport not been home rule, the water rate mess would have gone to referendum. In fact, it was even discussed at the city council of having a non-binding referendum. And it's also, let's keep in mind too, the city is running its finances from the water and sewer fund, known as the water and sewer slush fund. Salaries are paid from that, trucks are paid from that. So, let me tell you, home rule has not been our friend.
Yes, sir.
Now, back to the real estate question when it comes to that. This gentleman back here said the burden then will fall on real estate taxes, while you said that if home rule goes away, the real estate taxes can't be raised
Beyond the property tax
We have a
caps.
rate now of 13 in Freeport
Yeah.
Township. I think Megan would know.
But 13's for the all the 9 taxing bodies, right? It's not
Yeah, it
just.
includes a school, which takes up a big
Yeah,
part of it.
last I looked, schools usually take up around 57 to
yeah.
62%. Cities are usually around 7%. Counties are 5%. But what I'm saying, if it's not home rule, then it has to comply with property tax caps, which limits the amount that it can go up every year to the lower of I'm sorry, 5% or the urban. There's I can't remember. There's an expression that feds use. There's a limit. It's been like 1.7, 2.1% in the last few years. This year may be higher, but
I know the realtors had a large part to do with what happened in Rockford. And of course, they sent out a flyer that I'm sure everybody got saying, vote no.
Yep.
And I just wondered what their concern was. I had someone say, well, Freeport isn't in the same position as Rockford. And I don't know if that's accurate or not, but as far as I'm concerned, the realtors don't want to see the burden being passed on to real estate property taxes.
yeah, well,
That's the big thing, that
Freeport-
interest has gone up.
I think we would all agree that Freeport's a lot similar to Rockford than it is to Shannon. Yes, sir, in the back.
Yeah, can you go back to the Carbondale slide for a second?
I'm trying. This isn't my clicker. Okay, maybe I can go up. I'm trying, really.
While you're looking, could I have the gentleman up here that mentioned the water, the money we get from the water up here?
Yeah, I heard you say.
Steve, could you speak further to, you were talking about the fact that we get a lot of money from the water and sewer
Sure.
department and that home rule has really not been a friend?
Okay. Now, Lowell Crow, y'all remember him, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Like
He's-
Lowell.
Yeah, sadly, yeah. He said in an,
I'm
an
sorry.
op-ed
Thank
piece
you.
about 4 years ago in the paper about how the city was funded. A third of the salaries, like the city manager's salaries, come from the water and sewer fund. Okay, anything that touches water, partial legal fees, maintenance equipment, there's a nice message board out that was $15,000. You don't see it often, they don't like to roll it out for whatever reason.
Thank you.
But that came out of that too.
I understand that there, that it's come before the council that if we switch from, we have a lot of water bills not paid in the city because we do not require our landlords to collect
That's
the
correct.
water bills. Instead, we require that the renters pay, and then therefore we have this huge amount of money we do not collect, right?
Okay.
And for some reason,
Okay.
the city will not impose that upon the landlord?
There's a broader issue about, oh gosh, 10 years ago, I wanted to know how much the city was owed payments in arrears. It came back 1.8 million. And 4 years ago, the very local Lowell Crow, in another editorial, stated it was down to 1.4 million. Now, I think that figure has disappeared.
What do you mean disappear?
Ask her. I don't know. I'm not the communications director.
You know anything about it?
I genuinely don't know what he's talking about.
I don't either.
You don't know what I'm talking about?
I do.
Are you?
I don't know his answer. I don't understand his answer.
Well,
I knew Lowell Crow pretty well.
Oh, I know Lowell too.
Actually, I don't think he was as bad as most people think he was.
I didn't say he was.
He was a captain in the Navy.
All right, I want to get to my question. My
Okay.
question is,
In the back.
if you look at where it says city inspectors can't proactively enter and inspect rental property, so if we lose home rule, does that mean if we were to get a program like this going, does that mean like that's not even possible now?
This is Carbondale's situation. This may not be true for every home rule entity, but what they're saying is that without home rule, the only time they inspect is if a tenant complains. They don't do it on their own. There's something called administrative search warrants. If you're a governmental entity, your job is to inspect property or inspect businesses or whatever, you don't have to get the person's permission. The federal judge told me he spends half his day signing administrative search warrants. It's here, hi, I'm a federal inspector, it's my job to inspect, here's the administrative search warrant, let me in. You don't, you go into jail, okay? So what they're saying here is the only time they're gonna go out, the only time they have funding to have people available is if somebody's complaining. Other than that, they're not gonna go inspect. That's what Carbondale's saying.
So is that due to home rule restrictions or their budgetary restrictions?
Well, but the home rule gives them the budget to do it. It's both. They can do it as home rule because they have extra fees they can create that aren't allowed to non-home rule entities. In the back,
I was just going to say that that is just really specific to Carbondale. What it says is that gives Carbondale City Council the authority to create such an ordinance.
I think they've.
If they didn't have home rule, they couldn't create the ordinance at all. Budget or not, they could not create that ordinance.
They'd have to point to the statute that gives them the authority to operate that program.
Right. So not all cities do that at all, but Carbondale. So what they're saying is that they'll lose that ability. But that doesn't mean that all home rule communities have that kind of rule in place. And I will tell you that many years ago, the city tried really hard to get this kind of a program in place. And what it points out for everybody here is it didn't happen because a lot of folks fought against it, which tells you that home rule doesn't automatically mean the city gets to do whatever the hell it wants to do. It still has, you have the ability to reach out to your city council member. You don't have that same ability as good with your state representative. I can call up Kelvin and say, Kelvin, I don't want you to vote for this because blah, blah, blah. You could have called me back in the day and argued your point. Good luck doing that with your state representatives. So what home rule does is, to me, it really keeps it local. It keeps it the ability for the city council to make the decisions, whether it's on, property search or not. That's just specific to Carbondale. It might be specific to a lot of towns, but it doesn't necessarily mean, home rule doesn't mean you will put this program in place. It doesn't mean that at all. It just means the city would have the option to do that, and any other number of things.
Any other questions?
So how do we go about replacing home rule income? Other than...
You can only do what state statute lets you do. If it's not a home rule entity, you can't create new taxes, can't create new fees. You're limited to what the state statute says you can do for revenue.
So none of the non-home rule municipalities have any municipal fees, taxes, revenue?
They have it as allowed by state statute. They point to a state statute that says they can do it. If it's not in there, they don't do it.
So they can do it?
If
They
it's in
just
state
have to
statute.
do it within the state law?
Right.
So it's not like we can't generate revenue, have referendums, have licensing fees and so on and so forth, provided that we want to do that as a community.
You'd have to have a lot of referendums on that issue. That's one way of doing it. It's not California, but it can do it that way.
And just so everyone knows, I'm not against this. I'm really just trying to get the information to vote yes or no. But it does not instill a lot of confidence in me to not see any of this information put forward by the city. And I don't think that every voter is going to go and look at the financial statements in their entirety on the website. I don't think they should have to. I think Freeport ought to be communicating with us as the citizens. This makes no sense, especially if it is what you guys say it is, and it's absolutely going to sink us, and there's no reasonable way to compensate for that. I would think that they'd want to put that information out there. They don't have to advocate for it or against it. I knew that they can't do that. I know that. But you sure as hell can put you can recap this and put it on the website and communicate that to 20-some-odd thousand people. Not everybody can read a financial statement. And frankly, how many people will take the time to do that? I don't think that they will. And it's that kind of thing that diminishes their credibility and my confidence in them. I don't speak for anyone else, obviously, but that seems incompetent to me. That's weak. Put the info out there and let's get it out there.
Yes, sir. You've been waiting a long time. I'm sorry.
You said you like history, so why is the cutoff 25,000, not more or less?
Because that's what the Illinois Constitutional Convention in 1968 and 69 decided.
Is there a reason for 25?
Well, it was generally conceded that the larger the city, the more unique the problems. The smaller communities don't have the problems. Larger ones did, and they decided to draw it at 25,000. I have not read the constitutional debates to determine why it was 25 and not 35 or not 50. But the idea was the larger the community, the more need for flexibility. That's what I've been told. But I'm sorry, I don't have an answer as to why it was 25 and not a different number. Yes, sir.
Mike, I can't argue with this gentleman about the competency of the city government because I don't think there is any argument to be made. But nevertheless, filling that gap of $4 to $6 million with referendums, to me, seems like futility. I just don't think you can do it. Irrespective of the paperwork and the knowledge of the budgets, I just don't think that you can, I just don't believe that it can be done. We had it in Shorewood, and we had the same thing, and that's a much richer community than Freeport, much richer. And we still went home rule. We had to.
I don't disagree with you.
Other questions?
I just didn't know what the numbers or percentages were.
Other questions, ladies and gentlemen? Yes, sir. Yes, Tom.
I just wanted to tell you, you did a fantastic job of presenting this. I learned a lot from it. There's a lot of background history there to it, so a person can understand really where it comes from.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We've inherited it, but this explains really how we got there and reasons why we can and can't do stuff.
Thank you very much for your nice comments.
Is there any disappointment that this room is not full?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Just one more time, the gentleman over here was asking, is there any way that we can raise funds with some other method? And you mentioned if the state says you can.
Only if the state says you can.
Right.
Grants or something.
My point is, there may be virtually nothing that we have that would be helpful for us as state. So we can't really imply that we could get something from the state to make that be available.
Well, I want to thank all of you for taking the time and coming out. I was shocked when I walked in, there was this many people. I'm used to making presentations. I don't think it's just because of me. There's like 5 people show up. So thank you very much. I'll be around for a while. Thank you.